Hey everyone, Natty here, and I want to welcome you to the very first episode of Missionaries, Moms, and Mondays. I'm so glad you're here. There's two things I hope you're going to gain from every episode. The first is increased understanding about what your missionary might be experiencing. The second is a tool to help you take action. At the end of the day, this is about helping you find your answer to the question, what can I do? So let's dive in. This first episode is going to be broken down into a few parts because there's a lot to this first question. The question that I get asked the most, actually, which is what can I do if my missionary is struggling with emotions? Oh, we're hearing this one more and more often, aren't we, ladies? So many missionaries are struggling, and they're struggling with feelings of fear, uncertainty, doubt, self-doubt. Feelings of uneasiness and worry and anxiousness and concern and distress. And oh my gosh, these feelings can be so uncomfortable and even scary because it leads to a very real physical experience that they don't understand. As a young mom, I actually struggled with these feelings for quite some time, and I gotta admit, I was terrified. I had no idea what was happening. I had no understanding of what was going on. All I knew was that my heart was racing out of control. My stomach felt like hamsters had been let loose in there. In my inside of my intestines, I was hot. I was cold. I had a hard time breathing. Sometimes I felt like I couldn't breathe at all. I even felt multiple times like I was having a heart attack. Sometimes I couldn't sleep. Sometimes I couldn't eat. And I was like, I'm going crazy here. I would go into the doctor because I'm having all these symptoms, and they would say, perfect bill of health. You're doing great. But I did not feel great. See, what I didn't understand then was how connected our thoughts and feelings are to our physical body. I grew up thinking mental health, physical health, these are two separate things, right? But we don't have a mental, emotional self wandering around out there. Our mental and emotional self, physical body, they are inseparably connected. As a matter of fact, we are spiritual beings having a physical experience on this earth. So it actually would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? That our thoughts and our feelings would have some form of physical manifestation. Well, that is exactly how it works. And if your missionary is experiencing anything like this, oh, I want you to know they're not alone. They're not alone because missionaries everywhere are experiencing this, but even the prophet Joseph Smith went through this. I want to take you back to when he finally agreed to let Martin Harris take the first 116 pages of the translated manuscript. And I want you to look at what was happening in his life and put the parallels together with how this works with our missionaries. Joseph Smith was very young. He was called to serve a big mission. Under a lot of pressure, felt like he really wanted the approval of others, didn't always have it. He was asked to do something incredibly new for him. Like nothing about this was normal to his day-to-day life. I mean, he went from farming and working to what? Sitting, translating a book he didn't understand and a language he didn't understand with very little education and virtually no experience. He was in a new situation. He was newly married. He had a pregnant wife. He was surrounded by some people that supported him, some people that didn't. He had a companion, we'll call Martin Harris his companion for this example, that both wanted to work with him and was stuck dealing with issues at home, in his home life, like his wife. And he was being questioned about what he was doing. And finally he agrees, right? But let's think about what happens after that. After he takes the pages, Martin's gone. Emma has the baby. The baby ends up dying. Emma's not doing well. She's not recovering well. Martin is gone. He never came back. We have no idea what happened to the pages. And all of a sudden, there's all this uncertainty and all this unknown and all this doubt. And how does Joseph Smith describe that? What did it feel like? In the Book of Saints, we get some ideas here in his own words. He couldn't eat. He couldn't sleep. He felt uneasy. He was pacing, groaning, clenching his fists, sobbing. He talked about being mad at himself and his thoughts swirling. Think about that. How similar are these experiences? How parallel to our missionaries? I sat down with one young elder. It was a little bit of a heartbreaking discussion, and he described it to me like this. He said, I came out on my mission, and I was really excited. I was a little nervous, but I came out to serve a mission, and it's not what I expected. It's hard, and I'm struggling. Everything is different, and I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. I didn't expect to feel like this, and I feel like I'm going to go crazy. He proceeded to say, I can't eat, I'm struggling to sleep, my stomach hurts all the time, I feel nauseous most of the day. And he said, the biggest problem is that my thoughts race all the time. I worry about everything. He said, I never used to do this before, and I feel like I just can't take it anymore. I don't know what happened to me. What do I do? He looked right at me with tears in his eyes. He said, did I break? Is something broken? Ladies, what can we do to help our missionaries? The first thing we can do is to help them to understand what's happening so they don't have so much fear about it. The prophet Joseph taught knowledge does away with darkness, anxiety, and doubt, for these cannot exist where knowledge is. So let's start with knowledge. Let's gain some understanding about what is happening so that we can help do away with some of that, as Joseph Smith described it, anxiety and doubt. Let's really understand. Dan Siegel uses imagery to describe this called the window of tolerance. See, we all have this window of tolerance that can be described as our capacity to handle discomfort, our ability to manage stress and the various circumstances of life. I like to also think of this as the window of what's known and the window of what's safe. See, as we go through our day, the various stresses that hit us, well, they impact us in different ways. And we end up fluctuating inside of this window of tolerance. And while we're in there, even when life is stressful and even when life is busy, life experience has taught us that we kind of know what this is like, right? We've experienced it before. We've felt stress. We've felt busyness. We've felt the rush. We've felt the chaos. It's known. We've done it before. And because of that, our brain has some experience with this and can identify some level of safety even inside of the busy and the stress and the chaos. But what happens when everything becomes new and therefore unknown all at the same time? What happens when we change everything nearly immediately? Well, this is what's happening on a mission. And I want you to just imagine what happens to this window of tolerance when we all of a sudden change the clothes we wear, the language we speak, the time we wake up, the time we go to bed, who we spend our time with, how we spend our time, what we read, what we listen to, what we eat, where we live, where we sleep, who we share a room with. Maybe even sharing a room in general is somewhat new. What we're called, what we call others, what we're focused on, how we move our body, where we move our body, what we call ourselves. So much change. And all of that change puts us in a place where we have everything is uncertain and everything is unknown. And everything then can then spike us out of that window of tolerance because we're dealing with so much new, so much unknown. And when we exit this window, we exit into a state of what's called hyperarousal. Now, most of us have learned in our life that we call this fight or flight. Now, again, Dan Siegel models this with both the window of tolerance, but also the hand model. And he uses the physical hand to show us what's happening when we go into fight or flight so that we can understand what's actually going on in the brain. So if you were to take my hand, and this is the brain, the front fingers right here represent what's called the cerebral cortex, or the prefrontal cortex. And this is where all the logic and reasoning has happened. This is where my smarts show up, right? This is where we function as rational, logical human beings. Now, what that connects to is the brainstem. This is how we send instructions to the body of what to do. Now, what this covers up is the hippocampus. This is where pictures and memories are stored in the brain. Really important that we realize the brain doesn't know the difference between real or imagined pictures. They're just pictures in here. That's going to be important for later. Now, what's touching on that hippocampus is this thumb, and that's going to represent our amygdala. The amygdala has several big jobs, but one of them is the brain's threat detection center. Its job is to determine whether or not you're safe physically or emotionally. So here's how this works. Let's say you're walking alone in the dark and you're walking down the street. You start to hear rustle in the bushes and footsteps in the distance, and all of your senses are on high alert. And what's the picture that's pulling on the hippocampus? Well, usually it has more to do with an imagination or scary movie night than any lived memory or experience. And yet you can feel your body preparing for the unknown, the uncertain, the unsafe, and the stress is mounting. And then something jumps out of those bushes and bam, your lid flips. Why? Because your amygdala over here, the brain's threat detection center, just set off the safety alarm. And it's like, hey, I don't know what that is. Boom, flips the prefrontal cortex off the brainstem. And now our logical, rational brain is no longer driving the bus. But why? Why would our brain do that? Because when we're in times of threat, now is not the time to be logical. What if that threat jumps out of the bushes is dangerous to us? Is it really time to be thinking through this? How big is this person? They wearing running shoes or flip-flops? Because I got my running shoes on and I might be able to outrun them if they're wearing flip-flops. no, now is not the time. We need to react. So our brain literally removes the barrier of reaction for us and pushes us into fight or flight. Now, this is where very real physiology shows up, because when this alarm goes off, it's signaling the sympathetic nervous system. Blood is going to rush to the extremities to give us what we need physically in order to provide our body what it needs to get to safety, to fight or to flight, right? In essence, we have to be able to take a hit or deliver a hit. We got to run farther or maybe even faster than we ever could normally. So the body is preparing for this experience. What might that feel like physically? Well, could feel like the heart starts to race or pound out of the chest. Sometimes feels like tightness in the chest, hard to breathe, heavy. The stomach goes into knots or feels like you've been riding an elevator all day and maybe even feels nauseous. Sometimes it feels like something's running around in there, or it feels like you got a headache. Maybe blurry vision, racing thoughts, spiraling thoughts. Maybe you even clench your jaw or grind your teeth. You might feel tension in your neck or your shoulders, or tightness and constriction in your throat right here. You might even feel heat rise, like those cartoons, and up it comes. You might even get prickly on the top of the ears because of how hot and red you get. Maybe even your feet get numb and itchy and tingly, or you start to just sweat pits, face, sweaty palms. Again, why is all of this physiology happening? Because we exited the window of tolerance, and the brain's threat detection center said, this is unknown, and you might not be safe. So it is literally preparing the body to fight or flight, hit something or run. Now, when this happens and we're in real physical danger, we usually have a physical moment to express the energy. We run, we move, we hit something, we take a hit. But what happens when it's emotionally unsafe? When the situation that's new and unknown and uncertain is not a physical release of energy, and instead we're sitting with all of that energy. We're super aware of it. We feel the stomach, we feel the head, we feel the heart, we feel the breathing, we feel the sweating, we feel all of it. We feel like a heart attack, we feel like we might be dying, and we're just sitting there in it. Oh my gosh, how scary is that if we don't understand what's happening? You see, the bulk of the information we hear, again, physical health over here, mental health over here, they're not frequently combined. So we don't often take time to consider that the very real physiology I'm feeling right now is coming from thoughts and emotions. On top of that, we live in a world that's very symptom focused. So we talk about symptoms in order to diagnose a problem. We almost naturally assume if there are symptoms, there is a problem. Something's broken. Something needs to be fixed. We rarely sit back and take in all of these physical cues as information coming from our amygdala to inform us that we're experiencing an unknown and therefore potentially unsafe situation. So be aware, be prepared, proceed with caution. We don't take it that way. And yet that is exactly what's happening with our amygdala. Ironically, there's not good or bad being determined in these moments. It's simply known, unknown, certain, uncertain, which equals threats, safety, unsafe, safe. So what do we do? How do we handle this? First and foremost, we've got to help our missionaries understand. We've got to bring knowledge to the table about what is happening and what they're experiencing, so we can stop the fear. There's so much paralyzing fear around the physiology that is showing up around the unknown. And when they first leave on a mission, everything is unknown, everything is new, everything is uncertain. And so everything feels big. And the fear is real because they haven't felt that before. Why? Not because they haven't handled things before. I had one young man who was an athlete. He said, I've dealt with stress my whole life. I go to school. I deal with practice. I go home. I had a job. I had 4 family members. I had jobs at home. Why would this change things? Because prior to this, his brain had understanding and experience. Prior to this, he added one thing at a time. It started with school. And then, there was a little bit of trepidation when I went to school for the first time. But then, it's all right. I learned that. I'm okay now. There's safety in school. And then I added sports, and I was a little nervous that first time I went to my team, but man, was that fun. And so now the brain recognizes that. That's now known, and I can add sports on top of school. and stay in my window of tolerance. And then I had a big test, and that was really freaking me out the first time I took the big test, but I did okay on it and I survived it. And now the body and the brain have something to go back to through lived experience that says, oh yeah, we know what that is and we're going to be okay. And I can stay in my window of tolerance. But we go on the mission and everything is new. Exit window of tolerance. Poof, lid flips. Cue the nervous system, cue the sympathetic nervous system, cue the blood to the extremities, and here comes all of the emotion. There's got to be some understanding about where this physiology is coming from so that we can stop being so afraid of it. Stop beating ourselves up over it. This young elder was beating himself up. I could handle all of the stress at home. What is wrong with me? Oh, elder, nothing's wrong with you. You're actually working as designed. Your brain is literally working exactly as it was designed for your safety. We just didn't understand. And when we can understand, to see their faces when they understand, the lights go off and they're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I know this before? Why has nobody told me this before? And it's really cool to watch the hope return. So now what can we do? In these moments where there is emotional unsafety, the flow of physiology is real. And we're stuck. We're sitting in this mission experience with all the new. What can we do? Well, ironically, we can physically engage with it. And I'm going to teach you a 4-step process. Step 1 is to recognize. We've got to bring some awareness to the moments like these and what the actual physiological symptoms are that we're experiencing when we have these moments. To recognize when our lid flips, when we leave that window of tolerance, and then what's happening to us physically. Because when we can become aware of the symptoms, we can do a few things. One, we get to provide some grace and understanding for this. These symptoms are very, very real and incredibly scary in the unknown of what they mean. I mean, I was terrified when this was happening and I didn't understand it. We need to remove the fear and the doubt and the shame that comes along with experiencing the physiology that is literally how the brain is meant to function. The second step is to regulate. Once we start to recognize what's happening, we can regulate. The idea behind regulation is to physically engage with the very real physical symptoms we're feeling. It's the sympathetic nervous system that's kicked on. So we want to actually physically react and address that nervous system intentionally to calm it down and try to restore homeostasis, to restore calm. We want to intentionally inform the amygdala that even though the situation is unknown, and we're grateful that it's warning us and keeping us safe, that we are safe. Now, there's some things we can do to regulate, and there's 3 things that I want to teach you today. The first is to tense and release. The second is breath control. And the third is temperature control. Now, why would we do these 3 things? Because when this lid flips, remember this automatic part of things down here? This amygdala is signaling unsafety, and we're supposed to go into automatic function. Automatic breath looks like breathe in, breathe out. We don't think about it. Automatic function of tension in the body looks like when I step, my muscles contract and relax, and I don't even think about it. Automatic temperature looks like our body providing temperature, releasing temperature. We don't try to control it very often. When we try to take control of those 3 things, sending a nice little signal to the amygdala that we are not in an automatic function. This needs to stop with the alarm, and this needs to bring the lid back down, right? We need to re-engage the prefrontal cortex. I want to walk through this exercise with you, and I would love for you to actually do it so you can experience it for yourself. So we're going to start with our feet on the floor, and we're going to tense our toes inside of our shoes, really tense them, and then flex those legs, really flex up those quads, really flex up those glutes. Now really flex up those abs, and really flex that back, and then cinch those hands and just flex everything. And while we're doing that, we're going to take a deep breath in and we're going to hold it. And now we're going to spike it at the top. And when I release, I'm going to release everything. And I'm going to shake it out a little bit. Shake it out. And then I'm going to take a drink of something, ideally something cold. Ideally, your missionary has a water bottle or something that can keep something cold. Take a little drink. If they don't, they can run their hands under cold water. Or simply take a wet wipe out of their bag and wipe themselves down with something colder and literally intentionally engage in temperature control. Now, again, when we do those things, we're taking control of tension and releasing, breathing, and temperature control. All of those things affect the sympathetic nervous system and help send the message that there's safety here. And we can engage in all three of those at the same time. Now, what if they're in an appointment? You're like, wow, well, that's great. They can do that at home. But what if they're sitting in an appointment with a friend? They can't be all this. Now, what they do is you can just do the lower half. If they can cinch up those toes and cinch up those legs and just tighten that and hold it with tension and just take a breath in. And then they can release and just let go of all the tension in their legs and their lower extremities at the same time. They can actually do this with their fingers and move their senses. They can be very intentional about listening for something they couldn't hear before. They can even do things where they very intentionally move their eyes and their sight. When we engage in the senses outside of autonomic function, it will help us to regulate what's going on with the messages from that amygdala, and it can really calm things down. Now, once we've got ourselves regulated, the third step is remember. When we can come here and really remember who I am and how I choose to show up, there's power. Viktor Frankl is famous for the quote, "Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our happiness." In this space, this power to choose, it can be enhanced dramatically when we'll remember that we're children of God, disciples of a loving and merciful Savior, Jesus Christ, that we have access to His mercy and His power, and as a child of God, how do I want to show up in this situation? How do I want to respond? And then we get to step 4, which is to actually respond, to take the opportunity to engage with the unknown from a place of understanding, from a place of knowledge. When we think about this idea of step 3, remember, and step 4, respond, maybe the best illustration of that I can give was actually given by President Nelson in the April 2023 conference. He shared a personal experience in that talk, and it's really powerful illustration of this moment. And I'm going to go ahead and quote it. He said, "During my surgical internship many years ago, I assisted a surgeon who was amputating a leg filled with highly infectious gangrene. The operation was difficult. Then, to add to the tension, one of the team performed a task poorly, and the surgeon erupted in anger. In the middle of his tantrum, he threw his scalpel loaded with germs that landed in my forearm. Everyone in the operating room, except the out-of-control surgeon, was horrified by this dangerous breach of surgical practice. Gratefully, I did not become infected, but this experience left a lasting impression on me. In that very hour, I promised myself that whatever happened in my operating room, I would never lose control of my emotions. I also vowed that day never to throw anything in anger, whether it be scalpels or words." Ladies, the surgeon flipped his lid. And in the space between stimulus and response, he reacted. President Nelson said he now knew that he would choose how he responded by remembering who he was and how he wanted to show up. Again, these 4 steps, recognize, regulate, remember, and respond, have been applied to multiple missionaries. I've had the opportunity to watch this change the way they feel and the way they show up in their mission. I've personally witnessed the peace that comes over them from that understanding. When I was talking to that young elder that I spoke of earlier, once I explained this to them, he looked right at me, and with tears in his eyes, he said, "So I'm not broken." Another elder said, "You know, it would not have been this hard if I would have understood this before." A sister missionary said to me, "I can't believe how much better I feel just from doing these little things on purpose for 1 week." We weren't sent to this earth to be acted upon. We were sent to act. And in these moments of the unknown and the uncertainty and the unfamiliar, and we start to find it pretty scary to act because we don't know what's going on. We don't understand it. And because it all happens so fast, it feels like it's happening to us. And that can be remarkably overwhelming and incredibly debilitating. But moms, we can help our missionaries. In D&C 6:34, we read, "Fear not, little flock. Do good." Ladies, we can do this. Doubt not, fear not. So what can we do exactly? Well, the first step is to remember what the Lord instructed Hiram in D&C 11. He said, "Seek first to obtain the truth and then teach it." So the best way to do this is to start to understand this for yourself. Put it to the practice in your own life. Start to become aware for yourself. Step one, recognize. When is your lid flipping? What is your body telling you? What are your symptoms so that you can understand and empathize and relate to your missionary? Step two, regulate. Practice those three parts: tense and release, breathe, temperature control. Find out what works for you and be aware of how to communicate that. Step three, remember. Remember who you are. Remember how you choose to respond. Remember how you choose to show up. And then respond to the situation the way you want to. I know that each one of us has access to our own personal revelation for our children. And I know that as we seek for knowledge and understanding, we take what we've learned to our Heavenly Father in prayer. He can answer those prayers for us. Show us individually how to help our child. It's my prayer that as you learn from these videos, that you'll take it with the Spirit and apply it to what your missionary is experiencing. I hope that you'll do that prayerfully, mindfully, and intentionally. And I hope that you'll find the answer to what do I do if my missionary is struggling emotionally. See you next time.